John the Granny Killer Glover was born on the 26th of November 1932 in Wolverhampton, England. John's teenage years were spent committing a range of petty crimes, including stealing clothes and handbags. After leaving school at the age of 14, John would enlist and serve in the British Army for a short time before the Army discovered his prior crimes and he was subsequently ejected. In 1956, at the age of 24, John would immigrate to Melbourne, Australia. The move to Australia would not change John's behaviour, and he would rack up 2 counts of larceny in Victoria and another theft charge in New South Wales. In 1962, John's convictions would take a more serious turn when he was convicted on 2 counts of assaulting women in Melbourne, 2 counts of indecent assault, and another 4 counts of larceny. For these crimes, John would only receive a 3-year good behaviour bond, and in 1968, John would marry Gay Rolls, and a year later, the couple would move in with Gay's parents in Sydney. It is reported John had issues with his mother-in-law. Despite this, John lived a normal life, working as a sales rep for the 4 and 20 Meat Pie Company and volunteering at the Senior Citizens Society. John's mother Freda would join him in Australia in 1976, though the pair were said to have a tumultuous relationship, causing John to have issues with older women. The year 1989 would mark changes for John. His mother Freda would pass away from breast cancer, and not long after, John would also discover he had breast cancer himself. It is believed John's feelings compounded as he felt he was afflicted by a feminine disease and also started to suffer from a prostate condition, rendering him impotent. Soon after the diagnosis and death of his mother, John divorced Gay, ending their 20-year marriage, and she moved with her 2 daughters to New Zealand. On the 11th of January 1989, John would spot 84-year-old Margaret Todhunter walking down Hale Road in Mosman, Sydney. Parking his car, John approached Margaret, punching her in the face and stealing the contents of her purse, totaling $209 in cash that he later spent at the local pub. Though Margaret survived the attack and was able to give the police an accurate description of her attacker, the police did not hold much hope in finding the perpetrator. On March 1st, 1989, John would exit the Mosman RSL pub on Military Road and see 82-year-old Gwendolyn Mitchell-Hill walking down the street. Emboldened by his previous attack, John retrieved a hammer from his car and followed the elderly woman home. As Gwendolyn went to open her front door, John struck her in the back of the head with his hammer and continued striking her head and body, breaking several ribs. After stealing her purse, which contained $100 in cash, John fled the scene. Gwendolyn would later be found by 2 schoolboys, still alive but in an unstable condition, and she would soon pass after the police and ambulance arrived. Her neighbours, though well-intentioned, believed the woman had fallen and washed the crime scene, destroying any potential forensic evidence. Without any witnesses and the crime scene tampered with, police concluded it was a mugging gone wrong and failed to link the attack with Margaret Todhunter. Only a few months later, on the 9th of May 1989, John would once again be on Military Road and see 84-year-old Lady Winfreda Isabel Ashton walking toward him. Winfreda was on her way home and continued past John to the nearby Raglan Street. John followed behind her, putting on a pair of gloves and attacking with his hammer in the foyer of her apartment. Throwing Winfreda to the ground, he dragged her into a rubbish bin of clothes and repeatedly hit her head against the pavement, knocking the woman unconscious. John then removed Winfreda's pantyhose before strangling her with them. Finished with his assault, he placed Winfreda's walking stick and shoes by her feet before leaving with her purse, which contained $100 in cash. Right after the murder, John used the money at the local RSL, and upon hearing sirens headed to the crime scene would remark to staff he hoped the sirens weren't due to another mugging gone wrong. When police arrived at the scene, they found Winfreda laying face down, with blood pooling around her head. Her pantyhose were wrapped so tightly around her neck it had cut through the woman's skin. Now faced with 3 victims, all wealthy elderly women from the same suburb, police surmised they were dealing with a potential serial killer. Over the next 5 months, John would carry out 5 more assaults. On the 6th of June 1989, John would put his hand down the nightgown of 77-year-old Marjorie Mosley at Wesley Gardens Retirement Home. Though Marjorie would report this to staff and police, she was unable to remember what the men looked like. On the 24th of June, John would enter another nursing home, lifting up the dress of an elderly patient and touching her inappropriately. Moving to the neighbouring room, he would molest another patient who called out for help. Staff briefly questioned John, but allowed him to exit the nursing home. On the 8th of August, John attacked elderly Effie Carney, though details of the attack are undisclosed. John would then enter another nursing home on the 6th of October, pretending to be a doctor and molesting the blind and elderly Phyllis McNeil. Less than 2 weeks later, he would follow 86-year-old Doris Cox to a retirement village. After entering a secluded stairwell, John attacked Doris, ramming her face into a brick wall. Though Doris survived, she suffered from dementia and was unable to provide police with a clear description of her attacker, later stating it could have possibly been a young teenager. On November 2nd, 1989, 78-year-old Dorothy Bink was walking home with her groceries when John approached her offering to carry them. Thankful, Dorothy invited John inside for a cup of tea, but he declined. Walking back down the laneway, John would encounter 85-year-old widower Margaret Pahad, who was also on her way home from grocery shopping. John would strike Margaret once on the back of the head with a blunt instrument, causing her to collapse. Striking a second time, John would connect with the side of her head and rearrange her clothing, shoes, and walking stick in the same fashion as his previous victims. Again, John would take his victim's purse containing $300 in cash and spend it at the local RSL. Less than 24 hours later, John would approach 81-year-old Olive Cleveland, who was sitting on a park bench outside Wesley's Gardens retirement village. As the two began to converse, Olive grew uncomfortable and decided to walk to the main building. John seized Olive from behind, forcing her into a secluded side lane before repeatedly slamming her head into the concrete. John then removed Olive's pantyhose, strangling her with them. Finished with his assault, John rearranged Olive's belongings and stole $60 from her handbag. When Olive's body was discovered, it was believed her injuries were caused by a fall, and bystanders cleaned the crime scene. After this attack, the state government offered a $200,000 reward for the granny killer. On the 23rd of November, John was at the Buena Vista Hotel on Middlehead Road, when he spotted 93-year-old widower Muriel Falconer returning home from grocery shopping across the road. John exited the hotel to retrieve a hammer from his car before following Muriel home. The partially deaf and blind woman opened her front door, unaware she was being followed. Once the door was opened, John put his hands around her mouth to silence her screams, ushering her into her home. John then struck the woman in the head and neck with his hammer, causing Muriel to fall. When John tried to remove her pantyhose, she stirred back into consciousness and called for help. In an effort to silence his victim, John struck her multiple times with his hammer until she was unconscious. John then removed her undergarments and strangled her with them, once again rearranging her belongings before leaving with $100 in cash. The next afternoon, Muriel's neighbor would enter the home using a spare key and discover her body. This time, the crime scene was left undisturbed and investigators were able to collect forensic evidence in the form of bloody shoe prints. The neighbor provided a description of the potential suspect to police, stating he was middle-aged, portly, and grey-haired. John's fifth confirmed victim would see the reward for his capture increased to $250,000 by Christmas. On the 11th of January, 1990, John would make a pivotal mistake during his pie sales round at Greenwich Hospital. In his work uniform, with a clipboard in hand, John entered the palliative care ward which housed 4 sick and elderly women. It is here he would approach Daisy Roberts, an 82-year-old cancer patient, and ask if she was losing any body heat. John then pulled up Daisy's nightgown and touched her, causing Daisy to panic and call for help. A nurse rushed into the room and confronted John, who ran out of the ward without any attempt at explaining himself. Despite his hasty exit, the nurse was able to record his car's registration number and filed a report with police. As John was in full uniform and known around the hospital for his pie runs, staff were able to identify him by name. Though the detectives of Chatswood Police Station had identified John Glover for the hospital assault, they did not link him to the murders and did not report him to the murder task force. During this time, detectives contacted John, requesting he attend an interview at the police station. When John failed to show, police arrived at his home and spoke with his wife, who informed them he was recovering from a suicide attempt at Royal North Shore Hospital. When police arrived at the hospital, John declined questioning but did permit them to take a photo of him. Before leaving, hospital staff would pass on a suicide note written by Glover to the police. Written on the paper from one of his 4-on-20 invoice pages were the words, "No more grannies, grannies," and Essie started it. By Essie, John is referring to his ex-mother-in-law, Essie Rolls, the mother of Gay Rolls. 2 weeks later, the suicide note and photo police had taken at the hospital were passed on to the murder task force, numbering 70 members. The task force immediately concluded that John Glover was the granny killer, though they lacked any substantial evidence. The head of the task force would later state, "If he had said to us, 'I don't want to talk,' we wouldn't have proved a thing. Still, the photo matched the description of the grey-haired suspect, and in his job as the pie salesman, Glover could have been at any murder scene." When interviewed about the nursing home assaults, John denied all accusations, and without any evidence, police decided against further questioning regarding the murders. Their intention was to avoid alerting him to their suspicions without cause for arrest. Instead, John was put on surveillance and his car fitted with an automatic tracking device. Despite their efforts, John, whether paranoid or aware of police presence, went to great lengths to lose police details, driving around blocks more than once or driving the wrong way on a one-way street. Though the police were watching John, he would claim his sixth and final victim. At 10 a.m. on the 19th of March 1990, police would watch Joan Sinclair, a 60-year-old woman with whom John shared a platonic relationship, welcome him into her home. By 1 p.m, police would become concerned when there was no sign of the pair or any movement coming from within the house. By 6 p.m, the team was able to obtain permission to enter the home, and 2 uniformed police officers knocked on the front door but received no answer. Peering through the rear glass door, they discovered a hammer lying in a dry pool of blood on a mat. 4 detectives searched the home, finding Joan's corpse. Her head had extensive wounds from a blunt object and was wrapped in blood-soaked towels. Her body was naked from the waist down, and her pantyhose had been tied around her neck. Continuing their search, they found John unconscious in the bathtub after having attempted suicide. Later, John would tell police he had beat Joan in the head with his hammer and used her pantyhose to strangle her. After strangling her, he rolled her body onto a mat, wrapped towels around her head, and dragged her body across the room. Once finished, John ran a bath, swallowed a handful of Valium, and drank a bottle of Scotch whiskey before slashing his wrist and laying in the bathtub. The trial of John Glover commenced on the 28th of March 1990. John pleaded not guilty on the grounds of diminished responsibility, which argues although they broke the law, they should not be held fully criminally liable for doing so, as their mental functions were diminished or impaired. A psychiatrist would theorize that John had built up aggression against his mother during his childhood, and once again with his ex-mother-in-law Essie. After John's mother passed, the psychiatrist believed that John took his aggression out on others. Despite his attempts at defense, the Crown prosecutor stated that John was aware of his actions. Before murdering his victims, he was already planning what to do with their money, and took time to clean his hammer with acid. As he was impotent, his actions of tying the victim's pantyhose around their neck was to ensure death and attempt to trick police into believing the killer they were looking for was sexually motivated. Ultimately, the judge delivered a guilty verdict and stated, "He is able to choose when to attack and when to stay his hand. He is cunning and able to cover his tracks. It is plain that he has chosen his moments carefully. Although the crimes have been opportunistic, he has not gone in where the risks were overwhelming. The period since January 1989 has been one of the intense and serious crime involving extreme violence inflicted on elderly women, accompanied by theft or robbery of their property. On any view, the prisoner has shown himself to be an exceedingly dangerous person, and that view was mirrored by the opinions of the psychiatrists who gave evidence at his trial. I have no other alternative other than to impose the maximum available sentence, which means that the prisoner will be required to spend the remainder of his natural life in jail. It is inappropriate to impose any minimum term to be served before release on parole. Having regard to those life sentences, this is not a case where the prisoner may ever be released pursuant to any order of this court. He is never to be released. Though John was only convicted of 6 victims, he is also believed to be connected to 7 more unsolved murders of elderly women. Following conviction, John was imprisoned in Lithgow Prison, in a maximum security prison cell. During his time in prison, John would suffer from cancer, undergo 2 surgeries, and experience dramatic weight loss. In May 2005, John would collapse in his cell and be placed on suicide watch after stating, "I've had enough, I want to kill myself." On the 10th of September 2005, the 72-year-old serial killer would be found dead in his cell as a result of suicide by hanging.